Ministers and officials from dozens of countries have been gathering here in Brussels to try and drum up support for a peaceful political transition in Syria. But it comes against the backdrop of clashes along the Syrian-Lebanese border and in some coastal areas of Syria, the worst violence seen since the ouster of Bashar al-Assad. Now, all of this upheaval has immense humanitarian consequences. And I'm joined now by the Secretary-General of the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, Jagan Chapagain. Welcome to DW.
Thank you so much.
You've recently returned from Syria. Take us there. What did you see?
I like to describe from my trip to Damascus, when I boarded the plane from Doha and flying towards Damascus. The plane, almost 80% of the passengers were Syrians returning back to Syria. And I witnessed a mother telling her children through the window, showing down, through the window, the children were clearly not born in Syria. They were born in Europe. And when the plane landed, there was a massive celebration. People were with the Syrian flags, hugging and kissing each other, and a massive celebration. And that sort of showed the sign of hopefulness, the optimism among the Syrians that the change that took place in December is sort of taking the country into a positive direction. Then when I drove out of Damascus, getting into Homs and Aleppo and Idlib, while the optimism was still there, but there is also a stark needs, the infrastructural, the damage that the country went through during 14 years of civil war. The hospital system completely constrained, the electricity not available, the fuel shortage, the liquidity crisis, and a lot of the businesses were sort of shut down. Even the basic agricultural capacity in the rural area didn't exist because of lack of fuel and electricity, and of course many people fleeing out of the country. So it was a combination of hopefulness on the one hand, versus a massive needs and constraint and sort of devastated infrastructure on the other hand. And aligned with the hopefulness, there was also a massive expectation among the population. And as time goes by, and if those expectations are not met, this can turn into frustration. And I cannot make a direct link between this, but what we saw in the coastal area and in the border area with Lebanon, some of the conflict that's happening. If the Syria doesn't get the help quick enough, fast enough, in a right way, some of this optimism can slowly start disappearing.
You talked about expectations there. That's a word that we're hearing a lot in Brussels from the European Union side, because the EU has started the process of easing some of the slew of sanctions it imposed over Assad-era violations. But there are some member states which are very reticent about advancing sanctions relief precisely because some of the violence we've seen and those clashes over the weekend before last. How do you see that dilemma?
Of course, the sanctions are the prerogative of the government. So, as a humanitarian organizations, we don't take position on sanctions. But having just visited Syria and having visited the country a number of times before, and even if we just look at the impact some of the sanctions is having on our own ability to work, including getting money into the countries or getting goods into the countries, I do believe that some of the loosening of the sanction are the steps in the right direction. With the global economic situations, the actual resources available to invest in Syria from the governments would most likely be limited. That means the conditions need to be created for the private sector, the MDVs, to come in to invest. And as long as the sanctions are not relaxed enough for these people to see that their investment will actually produce return on investment, the rebuilding Syria would be extremely difficult and very slow. So I do hope that today's conversation, and I do hope that the Syrian government would be able to convince some of the skeptical governments that actually they mean business, and they can demonstrate through action that they are moving into the right direction, and the sanctions would be continuously loosened. Because without that, the rebuilding Syria would be, I will not say impossible, but it will take much longer. And when it takes so much longer, the people's frustration can grow when the expectations are not met for so long.
And of course, it's much harder to convince governments, given the scenes that we've seen recently, a death toll into the four figures. Can you understand the reticence?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and that's why I think it's extremely important for the Syrian government to demonstrate through their action that they mean what they say, and convince the governments that this is the right way to go. And as you know, and these are always the situation. These are very difficult balancing situations. On the one hand, you say, okay, we will not help you until you have changed. But without the help, change cannot happen. And I think that's where the situation is at the moment. So I really hope they will find a balancing solution between the two, so the skeptical people can see that there is a real commitment for change, and also for the Syrian authority to demonstrate that they actually mean what they have said and what they have committed. Actually, they are implementing it on the ground. Clearly, for me, just visiting there and seeing so much optimism and positive the environment, not only in Damascus but also outside, and just returned to Geneva, and after a week to hear those news and see those scenes was very upsetting. And this type of situation must be prevented.
Are you convinced by what you've seen so far from these interim authorities? I mean, the EU officials I'm speaking to talk about immense progress in some areas. Really big deal, for example, announced recently with the SDF, for example.
Yeah. I mean, clearly there have been a number of good signs there. I mean, when I traveled from Damascus to Idlib, there was no checkpoints. In the road, just last year, when I was in the same road, you had to go through multiple checkpoints. It's just one visible example of how things have changed and how people have felt safer, and how people have felt that they can move around the country. So by just seeing that, you can feel there is a lot of positive development happening. The one small thing I want to share with you, because some of the villages I visited, I generally go to the rural areas, and suddenly in those villages you could see a lot of fresh fruits and fresh vegetables available. And I asked them from where they come from, and they said, actually, this comes from within Syria. And one of the reasons people have been able to bring their fruits and vegetables to sell was because there are no checkpoints anymore. Because they said when they had to go through multiple checkpoints, they have to pay whatever. So they didn't make any profit out of doing it. They just had to go through the hassle. Now, just not having the checkpoints have facilitated the movement of fruits and vegetables in the villages. You see, sometimes these small things are indicators of the positive development. But it also shows how fragile it is. Just a week before, I came back with so much optimism, and just a week after, we saw and heard what happened. So the situation, clearly the progress is being made, it's in the positive direction, and some of the changes that has been implemented in a short period of time have been positive, but it is still very fragile. And this is a situation, I believe, that the international community needs to demonstrate solidarity so that those fragility could be addressed, rather than leave them alone to address with those fragility, which would be much harder.
Let's dig a bit into the other side of the debate here in the European Union, because there are countries that are pushing for very swift relief to sanctions to ease it more quickly. But let's be clear, it's not a purely altruistic motive here. It's not just about solidarity. It's because those countries, and I'm thinking specifically of Austria, for example, or Italy, they want to be able to deport Syrians. Right now, we're still talking about voluntary returns, but is it an appropriate motive here to be pushing for deportations in future?
I mean, for me, of course, it's very hard to read the motive people's mind. But if the Syria is helped through this difficult transition, and if there are right conditions for people to voluntarily return, and I think voluntary is still very important, at least as an organization. That's our official position. It still have to be voluntary. It still has to respect the human rights law and the refugees law. I think that will be extremely important. And the best way to meet those obligations which the states have signed is to help change the conditions on the ground. And that's why, there could be different motives, and I cannot get into that. But if the Syria is helped to create those right conditions on the ground so that people voluntarily decide to go back, I think that will be a win for everybody. And that's why I think not abandoning Syria at the moment is extremely important. They can have tough conversation inside the room with the Syrian authorities to make sure that those conditions are in place, but they need help, and they need to be helped.
You talked about abandonment. I think that's the way many have seen the sudden hollowing out of USAID, American aid. Has that impacted your work?
Yes.
How?
Because, as you know, the US government has been one of our very, very important donor and partner for many, many years, and we are very grateful for the great work we have done in the field of health particularly, but also responding to crises like the pandemic. Many people do not know, actually, we had a massive pandemic preparedness program before the COVID-19 happened, together with the USAID Bureau of Global Health, particularly in Africa, but also in Asia Pacific. So it's been a long standing partnerships. So of course, the current cut does impact our program, mostly the program that we deal with the climate change and some of the community health areas of work has been impacted. But we are in a constructive discussion with the new administration in Washington. We have had some successes in the form of continuing our program in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh, or our program in Mpox, or the Ebola, or our food security program in DRC. So we have had this conversation, and we have agreed to continue some of these programs. But there are, of course, other programs which are not continuing at the moment. But nature of our organization is we would like to have those constructive discussions and dialogue moving forward, and we would like to demonstrate the negative impact of stopping some of the humanitarian and development program. So we'll continue the engagement.
You're trying to be very constructive there, but you talked about the negative impact there. Spell that out for me a bit. I mean, we're talking about people that will die because this aid is not flowing.
Yeah. No, I mean, there are many programs because, like some of the programs we have been doing, let's say the polio program in Pakistan or Afghanistan, they may stop from July, and we are in discussion to continue them, for example. But if they stop from July, the polio is almost eradicated from the world. And some of these areas, many people cannot go because they are not very safe. So it's the Red Cross Red Crescent volunteers are accepted by the communities to go there and work. And imagine that the polio sort of goes out of control. And it sort of crosses the border to some of the neighboring countries. So the gain made for many, many years, after many, many years of work, can go down the drain very, very quickly. So I'm just giving you one example. But we still have until June to discuss and negotiate, and hopefully we can continue some of those programs. So clearly, but as you know, also having worked in the humanitarian field for almost 4 decades now, I haven't worked in any humanitarian crisis where we have had enough resources. The humanitarian organizations have always struggled to get the enough funding to do what we needed to do, or what we want to do, or what we are capable of doing. So in many ways, the humanitarian organizations have gone through this struggle. Of course, the scale, the current scale is just too big for organizations to adapt quickly enough. But my personal belief still is that having those constructive engagement, evidence-based engagement, is critical to move forward. I think constantly sort of focusing on the negatives, I don't know whether that's the right strategy. At least for me personally, and for my organizations, we want to be evidence-based, factual-based, and have those conversations with evidence on the table. And that's what we are currently doing.
So let's stay with the United States, but circle back to Syria, because we talked about sanctions relief from the European Union for Syria, but the United States has maintained its sanctions. And because those sanctions apply extraterritorially outside US zone territory, that really makes it almost impossible to invest in Syria. So what is the point of a pledging conference like we're having here in Brussels if the keys are essentially held in Washington's hands and they're not willing to turn that lock?
I think I would not say there's no point in having this conference, because when there are this degree of differences and difference of policies from different governments, to bring about the change, you do need to start somewhere. And if you cannot start from everywhere, you start from somewhere. And I do believe that there is a lot of ongoing dialogue between Europe and the United States on many issues, not only Syria. And I hope the conference like this today will only create that dynamics and energy to influence others. But in any crisis, you've got to start somewhere. And I hope this conference will help us into moving into that direction. And clearly, there has to be a demonstration of change also on the ground to convince people who are not yet convinced.
What then is your message to donors and to decision makers that are gathered here as they try to kind of look towards some sort of a peaceful future for Syria? It's far from guaranteed.
It is. I think there are a few things. The one, we talked about a lot, particularly around the creating enabling environment for investment. That includes, of course, lifting up the sanctions, or at least loosening of the sanctions if it is not fully lifted. That's critically important, because without that, I think rebuilding Syria purely through the humanitarian and development assistance, rebuilding Syria is not going to be enough. But the second thing is, of course, there are immediate humanitarian needs and the early recovery needs. So, placing resources and expertise to address the immediate humanitarian needs, but importantly, the early recovery. Literally every family I met when I was in Syria, basically message from them is, we appreciate that you are bringing us, they use the word boxes, because the goods are distributed in boxes, they are packed in boxes. We appreciate you are giving us the boxes, but please help us move out of the boxes. We want to work, we want to stand in our own feet. Last 13 years, we are standing on the queue to collect the boxes. Is undignified. So there is the absolute amazing willingness and commitment to work and stand on their own feet. So we also need to move from pure humanitarian to early recovery and reconstruction role, and that's where I hope the government will play. And finally, it's extremely important that we continue to uphold the international norms, the international humanitarian law, by all sides, and encouraging different parties to uphold the international humanitarian law. Last year was the worst year to be the humanitarian. Almost 300 humanitarians were killed. 32 of our own staff and volunteers were killed on line of duty. And when they were wearing Red Cross and the Red Crescent emblems, which are protected under the international humanitarian law. So, and unfortunately for the last number of years, there has been an erosion on the respect for the international humanitarian law. And I hope this conference will really commit to that, because, as you know, when we talk Syria, we cannot talk Syria in isolation. We need to talk the entire Middle East and how different conflicts are intertwined and how different players are involved in different parts of the conflict. So having a positive development in one part of the conflict can actually have a positive spillover effect for other conflicts in the region. So these would be sort of the three, probably the big messages I hope we can convey today.
Jagan Chapagain, Secretary General of the IFRC, thank you for speaking to DW.
Thank you for having me.